Hey, welcome back to Bullpen Sessions. My name is Andy NEARY, and this is episode 295. Today, I sit down with Steve Giannone. Steve is the Central Region Leader with Risk Strategies. We talk sales. You see, Steve knows a thing or two about sales because he runs a team of well over 100 producers in the Central Region for the Risk Strategies company. And I wanted to have Steve on to talk about a very important topic today, and that is how do you find good sales producers in the insurance industry today? There is not a week that goes by that I do not talk to an insurance agency owner, sales director, sales manager, and they tell me, Andy, if I give my producers leads, they're great. They just can't hunt their own business. So in this episode, you are going to learn some tips Steve shares about how you should be hunting for business, what Steve looks for or others look for in a good producer. So whether you are new to the insurance industry, fresh into your new production role, or you've been doing this for 25 years, this is going to be a really good episode for you because we talk all things sales and we talk about what it takes to win in the sales game today. Steve shares his journey in the insurance industry from underwriting to the sales position. And we focus a lot of time on the character traits of effective sales producers today. So take a lot of notes. This is going to be a great episode. I wanted to have Steve on because I know him very well. And I highly respect his opinions on sales professionals because he has hired a lot of them over his career. So here we go. Let's dive into episode 295, my interview with Steve Giannone. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. All right, I am excited today to have Steve Giannone join me with Risk Strategies. Steve is a Central Region Leader with Risk Strategies, and we are going to have an awesome conversation about how to find good and effective sales producers. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah. Before we get into the conversation with sales producers, because I'm sure we could talk of days about that. I'm curious. Most of us did not get in this industry by design. I'm going to guess that was your story as well. You've been in it for at least 20 plus years, I believe. How the heck did you find yourself in insurance?
That's a good question. I was not a risk management student. Been in the business 33 years, and I was a finance major at a small college in upstate New York. And as I approached my senior year and looking for jobs, I had a family member, my brother, who was in the business, worked for Travelers on the underwriting side, or actually Hartford Steam Boiler. And there was a spot to come in and be a scrub player and help and support all the producers and all the underwriters there in their operation. And it was my entree in, and I never looked back. I never thought it would turn into the career it has, but it's been exciting. And I think each step along the way has helped get me ready for what I'm doing today.
Yeah. And you mentioned offline, you live in Chicago and you have for 20 some years, but you're actually from out East. You said, yeah. I think you said New Jersey.
Yeah. Grew up in New Jersey. Yes.
Whereabouts?
The northern part of New Jersey, Madison.
Okay. Yeah. The guy who does our website, he has an office right on, I'm forgetting the name of the lake. It's a pretty big lake up there that's well known.
Lake Apacon?
There it is. That's it. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been there. I was there last summer. But yeah. Okay. So I'm curious. You actually started your career as an underwriter, and here you are today leading a sales team. Talk about that journey, because underwriting is a very different skill set than selling. And you could argue a lot of underwriters are introverts and salespeople need to be extroverts. What was that like transitioning from that role to where you are today?
So it was a slow transition, right? I would say the first 10 years of my career was clearly learning the business, learning coverage forms, the boring part of the job. And I agree. It takes a different type of DNA to be an underwriter than a salesperson. But I quickly, after 10 years, got into some functions in the underwriting company world that were more forward-facing, more marketing-facing, more out in front of people, less technical, more relationship-driven. So that's kind of when I started dealing with brokers and managing broker relationships, I got a really good handle on how the brokerage operation works, whether it's a small agency or a large, brokerage firm like a Willis, where I was for a period of time. So, so that's how it transitioned. And when I just sat back and thought about my skill sets and what I think I'm better at, I would tell you I'm better on the front end of the business, the selling and the marketing. And I think I'm better because I do know how the back of the kitchen works, right? And how the sausage is made. I usually say it helps in conversations with customers or prospects when they know intimately how that underwriting process works. I think it's a benefit for me.
Talk to, if you don't mind, talk about that a little bit, because I was telling you offline, we work with an agency right now who a lot of their producers are former underwriters and risk adjusters. And I know carrier reps that have made the move over to the advising side, the broker side, and have had a lot of success because they know what levers are pulled inside the carrier. Talk about, did you see that as a natural advantage when you did start selling because of the underwriting background? You knew what was going on behind the rates, how they were created and things like that.
So the answer is yes. The advantage that I quickly saw was it starts with the submission, right? So if I'm presenting a deal to a number of markets to have them put their stamp on it, it matters where that sits on someone's desk, the proverbial pile on their desk, right? How do I make my submission get to the top? Well, it starts with having a well-balanced submission with a lot of information and asking the questions that I know those underwriters are going to have. Oftentimes, you get producers or brokers that might not want to go back to the client a third time to obtain some information, right? Because we're balancing, keeping them at bay too, that we got this, don't worry, we're going to make this painless. But I really think those extra questions that you put in a submission, because the underwriting process, helps get your submission viewed more quickly, and being responsive and truly eliminating the mystery on what this account does, how they operate. Again, it all comes in the quality submission that you're sending out.
Yeah, it's a really relevant point, because if you think about it, that how does a former underwriter turned sales producer use that to his or her advantage? When you can tell the prospect exactly what underwriting's looking for and what they need to do to look pretty to underwriting, that's a huge, huge advantage. You brought back bad memories too, because I started my career at Federated.
Sure.
And I'll never forget, you have to do ride-alongs with other producers when you get started. And I did a ride along with a veteran, a guy who'd been around for a long time. And we went into a convenience store, because Federated, that was one of the BOP niches we had.
Sure.
And we walked back out, and I watched him produce a quote, put the submission together. And he didn't put much together. And I'm like, well, aren't we supposed to do this? And he literally stopped me mid-sentence. He goes, if they ever tell you got to put work into the submission, tell them to go to where. But I quickly learned, if you don't spend time on a good submission, you are not getting good rates.
It's garbage in, garbage out is the way I've always looked at it. There's a balance, because we're working with carriers that, are making judgments on every person that touches that deal, whether it's the producer or whether it's a broker internally at our shop. Or whoever's having a conversation and being involved in that transaction. Again, being in the know of what's going on with that account and not pretending or faking it will go a long way. In many spots there.
I'm going to ask a question I didn't intend to ask, and I don't want it to be a surprise, but I've had this conversation a lot with peers. I've got that laid back Midwest personality, and I've always told my friends out East, if I went and tried to sell insurance in New York or New Jersey, I'd get laughed out of the room. Coming from the East like that, did you experience a difference in selling in the Midwest? Just from a personality standpoint, I'm curious.
I did. Was it, early on, it seemed to be so separate.
Okay.
And maybe it was more of the bravado that comes out with the East Coast. I've toned it down quite a bit, and hopefully, this podcast will show you that. But there is a difference in the selling technique, in the style, in the not as in your face, if you will. But I do think a good Midwest broker can succeed in the East Coast because, again, it comes back to the basics. If you're technical, if you're on point, you know how to work with clients, you could do it anywhere, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just remember when I was in Colorado, especially, which was even more laid back. I used to laugh at my peers who are in New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I'm like, guys, if you ever came out here and tried to sell, these CEOs would be like, what are you talking about, man? So no, I wanted your opinion on that, but it's a good segue. We talked about what underwriting's looking for. This conversation is going to be talking about how to find what it takes to find a good sales producer. And I wanted to have you on to have this discussion because you work with plenty of them inside of Risk Strategies. And, I have conversations every week, Steve, with sales directors and sales managers. And one of the things that I hear over and over and over again, that is, Andy, my producers are great if we give them leads. They just are not good at hunting their own business. Let's start here. When you look at the landscape in the industry today, where do you see the challenges right now in finding good producers?
It is a great question, right? I would start where saying there's a lot of different challenges. One is understanding, do they really have the DNA to eat what they kill in that, every brokerage operation has made a nice little entree for people to come in and not go upside down, especially if they're leaving a book of business and they're dealing with restricted covenants that they can't, avoid. But what I find is if they're not as specialized as they could be, that's where the drawback is. People come in, or the ones we're hunting are just generalists in theory. If I sit back and look at the region that I manage for Risk Strategies, we have 105 producers. And, you've been working with a lot of those with the coaching sessions. I think when you look at it, if I look at my top producers, every single one of them, not 90% of them, every single one of my top 20% producers, which is 80% of my revenue of new business, is a specialist, 100%. And so when I think about how do we onboard some new producers, I'm seeking out specifically people with specialty knowledge. And specialty is just not, how a contractor runs, how, a certain industry runs. No, you're ingrained in it. You're already putting out thought leadership on it. You live and die and breathe that industry. You're involved in trade associations. You're marketing. You're speaking. You're doing all of that. It's really tough, to your question, to find that person that has invested 100% of themselves in one or two. I would say two is okay too. One or two industries or product specialties. You could be a captive expert.
Yep.
That works with every industry, but you and live and die how captives work. You could articulate them and get really technical about it, or bring in the right technical abilities around you to speak to some of those financial components that are part of captive.
No, I'm glad you said that, because I often say this in my speaking engagements. The days of, hey, I just hung my sign up on a shingle here, and we sell insurance, come one, come all. It's a quick way to fail these days. You have to become known for one or maybe two things, like specialize.
Yeah.
And I was having my real epiphany with this, Steve, was I was having a conversation with a peer of mine who I've known for a while on the benefits side, outside the box thinker. And he's always struggled with every agency he's gone to because his team just couldn't quite see what he was trying to get accomplished with this outside the box idea. So now he went to work for an agency who literally only works in one industry. It's an agency, a benefits agency designed for one industry. They have built a benefits plan for one industry. And I caught up with him a couple months ago and I said, how things are going, man? He's like, never been better. I've sold 70 new accounts in the last 2 years. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on? He goes, the second I went to work here where I could walk in as a specialist, everything changed.
You're viewed differently as that prospect, or if it's a renewal for a client, right? They want to do business with people that understand their business. And really it's where the trust, to me, it's where trust escalates in a big way when you're showing, I know your business. You've seen, like in many cases, these prospects may have seen that producer out in the space, has already kind of convinced them that he or she is the person to go with. But it really comes down to, building that trust, which comes with the specialty and technical ability and not too salesy, but knowing, because you got to go into sales mode.
Yep.
It's all part of the process. So
what advice would you give? I think if somebody decided, hey, I'm going to become the captive go-to, or I'm going to, a product-based go-to, what they need to do is pretty obvious. Technical skill, get to learn the product inside and out. What about the industry niche? So we often have producers who will pick an industry niche. Maybe some they have a tie to because their dad owned a construction company or something, but a lot of them pick an industry just, hey, I want to go into that niche. What advice would you give when it's an industry-based specialty to start really getting ingrained in becoming that thought leader in that industry? What advice would you give that producer?
I think it starts with the company you're working for, right? So when I think about risk strategies, we have well over 30 different verticals, industry verticals.
Yep.
And when we stand up a vertical, that means we have enough institutional, we've institutionalized a vertical so well because either we've acquired companies that specialize in that area. And what comes with that is all the bespoke work that comes, thought leadership, getting out in the market, being seen, advertising, both digital and all other different ways of working the marketing angles. But I do think that if you have a new producer, how do you learn? You need to have talent around you that's going to help you get indoctrinated into that. That's a helpful thing. The other part is finding every industry has some type of trade magazine or trade association that we find, and most brokerage firms are willing to help defray that cost to that producer. So get out there. And we don't want you to take a back seat in those engagements. We want to the point where you could stand up and speak or stand up and be on a board, right? Find ways to work that network than just be a participant looking to see their list of participants that show up to these meetings, right? You got to work it. But that's how we see the success with, diving into an industry.
What I'm hearing you say too, that I think is important, is you're giving to the industry as much as you're asking from it, right? I see it a lot on the benefits side. You have these associations where carrier reps and things like that sit on the board. And I hate to say it, I think they do less because they want to and more because it's the ulterior motive that if I'm at least show up, at least it looks like I'm active, I'll get business. I think what you said is very important. You have to have the motive that you want to be a participant in it. And you want to give back to that industry. I think that's very, very important. What about, here's another question. I'm always curious because in our industry, we have this trend where you have an account exec who's been with the firm for quite a while. And then the sales leader says, hey, you should give this production thing a try. You can make more money. You can make commission. Sky's the limit. And what I see happen a lot is an account exec turns producer, but isn't really given the training or the support to really go out and make it happen. My question to you is, can an account exec become a successful producer? And what do you think they need, or what do they need to focus on to become a successful producer? Because I feel like there's often a lot of lack of support for them, and then they go give it a try, and you see a complete lack of success.
So great question. And I'll tell you that over the last 18 months, we've taken 3 of our very own account executives that for what we saw in them, they had a little bit of an edge that we think would have given them a shot at producing, and they wanted to give it a try. Those 3 are some of our most successful producers today. Okay. I just talked to a prospect producer on Friday, $3.2 million book, which is based upon financial institutions, D&O. Like he leads with D&O knowledge, cyber and D&O. And he was an account executive 6 years ago, and now he's built up a $3.2 million book.
Wow.
I do think it's hard. It's almost kind of the beginning question. Like, how do you go from underwriting into, the broker side of things, right? It is a transition. Not everyone can do it, but there are certain people have the right DNA to be able to take that challenge, to take that leap. But I do think anything a company can do to help coach and guide and provide those sales skills, for instance, what we're doing, I have some very seasoned people that are being coached by you today, right? And I have some very new green producers being coached by you. They're all hearing the same thing. We got to continue to invest in our producers and all employees, frankly, right? In the different, depending on whatever their job needs are, right? So,
well, and you said something I'd like to expand on a little bit. You talked about the DNA. Certain account execs, you may observe, okay, I think they've got the DNA, right? I'd be curious to know what you're looking for, whether it's an account exec going to the producer world or going out and looking for new producers. I always say there's things you can coach and things you can't. We can coach technical skill. We can coach some sales skills. But from a DNA perspective, maybe the things you can't coach, are there certain things you're looking for in a producer, veteran or young, that says, I think they got what it takes?
It's a tough question. I use the DNA word all the time, but how do you put your finger on what really, self-motivation, right? That's a big part. It's hard to coach.
Do you find, let me ask you this, Steve, do you find a lot of the producers you recruit or are having success? I see this a lot, former athletes. Right? What ties a lot of former athletes together? It's usually that drive and that discipline. If they were successful in sports, they probably are applying that drive and discipline to selling insurance. Do you see similar common ties like that?
Yeah, we do. We certainly do. I think, it's important to realize that the biggest fear of making the leap, in my mind, it's someone that's afraid of the eat what you kill pay structure, right? There are people that can probably make that leap, but they have a family, they have college bills coming up, right? They're thinking about all the what if I'm not successful. They're thinking about failure. So the reverse of that is I need someone that looks for success, that thinks successfully, that's proud of who they are and what they're going to build, and they have that vision of being winners, right? So sports is certainly something that we've seen. Most, and we've hired a lot of folks that have a good athletic background, but that's just one piece that we come across here and there, and the higher they go up in the sport world and they play in college, it's even more noticeable. But even the team sport, I also we always think about the successful producers. How are they opening doors? I also say, how are they treating the staff that they have to help them work on the deals? So it takes that DNA is not just tunnel vision on how do I sell? It's how do I create relationships? How do I create, how do I keep renewing these customers year in, year out, right? How do I keep, my foot on the accelerator, but never losing sight of what customers have trusted us. I
love that you said that, because I've been part of an agency and witnessed other agencies who have an all-star producer on the team, but quite frankly, is a cancer to the culture.
Yeah.
And they don't treat the team with respect. And instead of doing something about it, they kind of put the producer in the corner and say they'll work by themselves for the sake of the revenue. And it absolutely destroys the culture of the company. It
does. We've had that situation, and not just here. I've seen it all in my career.
Yep.
I personally have a zero tolerance for it. And there's ways to kind of get it better, kind of paint the picture of what it could be, what it should be. But again, zero tolerance, there's no need for it. It takes the entire village to make this work. Right. So.
Yeah, I love that.
I have always said, sorry to cut you off there. The hardest job in the world of insurance brokerage is that of a producer. It is very difficult. It's every day you got to be up and at it. There's an easy way to measure your scorecard and how you're doing based on the success and the revenues you're bringing in, the new customers you're bringing in. It's so there's a lot of pressure. And again, pressure doesn't mean you could be mean to people, but pressure just means we respect that. We know it's a difficult job. There's obviously unlimited, income potential for that risk.
Yep.
And that's just another little piece that
I think it's something everybody needs to hear. I've said this a lot in the last year or two. What makes the industry it can be challenging for people is, number one, most of us did not get in it by design, right? And therefore, the North Star for a lot of people could be just the act of making money. Then on top of that, you pair it with, we have always, depending on where you work, we've always paid producers an extraordinarily large salary to open and close business. So for some producers, their biggest challenge is actually the fact on day one, they're fed. They're being paid a nice salary out of the gate. Yeah, I get it. It goes away, but you're fed from day one. It's hard to get that drive if you're being fed. Now you pair it with the fact they may not even like the fact they sell insurance. And when things get tough, they want to quit. And that's why I bring it back. One of the biggest lessons I've learned, Steve, probably more with growing Complete Game Consulting than selling insurance, is, are you putting in the work and the activity because you feel you have to, or are you doing it because you're truly excited that you can help people? And that's two totally different mindsets.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It is two different mindsets for sure. We all too often see a lot of resumes come across my desk because we always are looking for producers, right? So whether we're internally recruiting or using some outside sources to help with recruiting, that takes a village as well. But there's all too often you see many resumes and you just look 3 jobs in 9 years, right? That's 2 failures, and now the third one is happening, right? That's the assumption. That's the way I start. Everyone has a story. Every story needs to be heard. But oftentimes it's just you found someone that went in, they had the guaranteed salary, it finally ran out after 2 or 3 years, and they never sustained or the word validated. They never validated to be able to continue on their own. And then they find and you know what? Look, we've all made mistakes and we've hired those people, right? They're going to do better in my world, in our culture, in our resources, in our approach to the business. And we've been fooled, I hate to say it, but more times than we care to talk about.
Yeah. A lot of people can sell themselves in the interview process. 2 questions I'd love for you to answer, and then we'll start to wrap this up.
Sure.
2 types of producers we work with a lot these days. You got the new producer and you've got the veteran who's trying to find that spark again. What advice would you give? Let's start with the veteran. If you've got a veteran producer on your team, been around 15, 20 years, and maybe they've hit a little plateau and they're trying to get going again, what advice would you give that producer? They're still trying to actively sell, but hey, it's harder than it used to be. The things I used to do may not be working as like they used to. What advice would you give that producer to try to re-spark their excitement for what they do?
Well, I'll just go from some recent experience. A veteran producer gets to a point where their referral, I call it referability, right? Like their new deals come from a lot of great referrals that they have. But I find some veteran producers that don't even work the referral market. And so the advice that I'm like is don't disregard all this great work you do for others. Find ways to get into their network. And you'd be surprised. Even 1 or 2 calls might turn into your a successful year versus a non-successful year. I also talk a lot about, there's a shelf life. We talk about shelf life a lot about some of our accounts. Invariably, I don't care how good we service a deal or how much someone loves us. Invariably, they might get a new CFO, or they might go private equity, or they might whatever different angle they have, and for no fault of our own, we lose the deal. So how do you replace that income, right? So how do you sustain the income? So you try to motivate them from that perspective as well. But the last thing I always say is, and this is something we always talk about, continuous learning is, what we all need to do. And what I've found with some of our veteran producers, we've been introducing, and you've helped us dramatically in this with a lot of the social media side, creating a personal brand. They have a brand, they just never advertised it.
Yep.
Right. Because they didn't grow up in that world, if you will, and teaching them those tools and making it easy. And that's what we've done. We've created a sales enablement team that is there to help our producers do some of this stuff that they might not otherwise do on their own, because it might be some new technology or a new way of selling. So we've been trying to hold their hand and helping them on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Two things I pulled out of there that are so true. Number one, I think a lot of veterans underappreciate their network, and referrals are the quickest path to cash. I've learned that from mentors of mine. So if you've built a nice network, all the activity you need is probably sitting in that network some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
Number two, always be learning, right? I think one thing that ties a lot of successful veterans that keep growing is I hear them say often, I know I've been around for 19 years, but I still feel like I haven't arrived yet, because they're constantly striving for growth. Let's go the flip side. You've got a new producer, never been in the industry, 24 years old, just getting in. What advice would you give that new producer who's green when it comes to, okay, you want to be successful in insurance, here's what you need to do? What advice would you give that person?
What we generally do with the greener producers is we connect them with a more seasoned person. So they start to kind of get some ideas of it doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it, but learn from a couple samples and then figure out and put it in your own approach. So aligning them with some others that have been successful in the field is one thing we do. I do think I go back to the technical training. You could come in here and never have sold insurance and be successful selling insurance. I think you'll be more successful if you learn something about what it is you're selling, right? Learn a contract. Obviously, you're going to need to get your license, so you're going to learn some things that are in the standard, government issued tests, if you will. But it's not enough, right? We work with carrier partners that put on production or put on, underwriting seminars, if you will, right? Those are some good things. But it all comes back to find a passion you have, right? If you love a certain industry, or it could be you grew up, your dad worked in the pharmaceutical business, and all you ever heard your whole life is about pharmaceuticals. Well, maybe that's your passion. You never know where it comes from. And just own, again, going back to the specialization, own one or two industries or a product, and just try to get really good at it, and never be afraid of failing, because you're going to fail in the beginning. You're just going to, and it just takes that, get back up on the horse and try a couple more times, and believe, it takes that first one or two wins, and then you start building that confidence.
I agree. I think the last piece is it's going to take hard work. I can still remember when I was given the Federated Insurance brochure that by year 3, the average Federated rep makes $140,000. That was in 2002 terms. But what they forgot to tell me is you got to work your butt off to get there.
Yeah. No, you're right.
You're right. So it's going to take hard work. Steve, this was awesome. I want to thank you for taking the time to jump on and have this conversation, because I thought it was one worth having, because it is hard to find sales producers who have that DNA, who have that drive and discipline today to go out and get after it. So your insights were very appreciated.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And,
and for everybody else listening in, take Steve manages over 100 producers. So take his advice. If you're that veteran trying to turn things around, referrals, keep learning, keep reaching out, talk to the network you've already built. And if you're a new producer, find a mentor, get the industry knowledge. I love that you said, Steve, you don't taking the test isn't enough. I laugh because I'm like, if all the knowledge I ever needed was on the life and health test I took to get my license, you would think all I'm ever going to sell anymore is disability insurance because half the test was on disability insurance.
Yeah.
But anyways, find a mentor, technical skill, technical knowledge, and then go find that specialization you're passionate about. That's such great advice. So
well, thank you.
So thanks, Steve. Everybody else, take this advice, run with it. Steve has given you a lot of good nuggets on how to take your production career to the next level. Be good. That's all we got for today's episode of the Bullpen Sessions podcast. One thing that would really help us both and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in to listen to the show. Also, make sure to link up with us at CompleteGameConsulting.com on social media. And please share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, remember, clarity creates confidence. Confidence creates consistency. Consistency makes you unstoppable.